Hello, Sakai. How are you? Okay. Yeah, setting up. No, that's not the advertisement. That's no, that's the person who operating. That's his photo. Yeah. In the middle. Okay. Yeah, but then, hang on. I was trying to say this thing here. That's not. I made some copies also too. How are you, my brother? Surprise there. Co- Yeah. Enrique de Rome. Yeah. It's funny. De Rome. Enrique de Rome. Yes, like, like, Welcome, Gerald.
About the boy, and I know it's stupid to be mad about the boy. I'm so ashamed of it, but must admit the sleepless nights I've had about the boy. On the silver screen, he melts my foolish heart in every single scene. Although I'm quite aware that here and there are traces of the cad about the boy. Lord knows I'm not a fool girl. I really shouldn't care. Lord knows I'm not a schoolgirl who's in the flurry of her first affair. Will it ever cloy this odd diversity of misery and joy? I'm feeling quite insane and young again, and all because I'm mad about the boy. I'm feeling quite insane and young again, and all because I'm mad about the boy.
This big time ride is all I know. A picture perfect live on the show. Stellar nights that never end, and people claim to be your friend, but you are the one I need. No place I'd rather be. Here only I can breathe. Love is a simple thing for free.
At this point, I will like to welcome all of you to this very important on the campaign to designate the date of the Cuban tragedy, October 6th, as the United Nations International Day Against Terrorism. A number of NGOs in the Caribbean region are supporting this process. And at this point, I will invite our brother, Lalo Hanneman, to officially address you. Thank you.
Greetings, comrades and friends. As my brother David Denny said, defined and shaped largely out of an experience of genocide, enslavement, forced labor, and a daily existence defined by fear and uncertainty. Despite a history defined by terror, our Caribbean has constructed its post-colonial life in the pursuit of democracy, inclusiveness, dignity, peace, and the non-interference in the internal affairs of other sovereign nations. This commitment to peace has been enshrined in our consciousness and deliberate definition of the Caribbean as a zone of peace, perhaps as a catharsis for the many maritime wars which were fought in the Caribbean Sea, and the untold number of African bodies for whom the Atlantic Ocean served as their final resting place. And of course, we must also mention here the genocide of the indigenous peoples by colonialism. Millions of them were slaughtered. We are confident that our pre- and post-colonial historical experience has given the Caribbean the moral legitimacy to serve as global voices on issues pertaining to human rights, economic upliftment, dignified living, and a life free from terror for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or political persuasion. It is against this background, therefore, that a coalition of organizations comprising of the Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, the Clement Payne Movement, the Caribbean Pan-African Network, the Global African Congress, the Organization for the People, the Victory of the People, the Pan-African Coalition of Organizations, the Israel Lovell Foundation, the Barbadian-Cuban Friendship Association, and the 13th of June 1980 movement used the 46th anniversary of the designate October the 6th as International Day Against Terrorism. And the rationale for that is this. On the 1st of July 2016, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution, number 70 of 291, entitled United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy Review, and outlined therein the international community's unwavering determination to prevent and combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, as well as the United Nations' ongoing commitment to actively pursue a comprehensive range of anti-terrorism initiatives, measures, programs, and policies. In furtherance of this resolution, and in the week of commemorative activities to mark the 1976 bombing of the Cubana Airways flight over Barbados, we, the coalition of civil society organizations mentioned previously, meet to make public our proposal to the United Nations organization that the United Nations should declare an International Day Against Terrorism, and that the 6th day of October, the day that is eternally linked to the 1976 Cubana terrorist tragedy, should be chosen as the designated day. The idea of designating a United Nations International Day Against Terrorism and the associated idea of calling upon all member states of the United Nations and their civil society organizations and agenda, and to express a worldwide commitment to combat and eradicate terrorism is fully consonant with the many public, educational, and people-centered anti-terrorism initiatives detailed in the General Assembly resolution of number 70 of 291. It is worthy of note that while resolution number 70 of 291 affirms the importance of education as a tool to prevent terrorism and encourages civil society at large to engage in efforts to enhance the implementation of the United Nations anti-terrorism strategy. It also encourages United Nations member states to involve youth and other relevant sectors in the promotion of a culture of peace and tolerance, and outlines a plethora of anti-terrorism initiatives and programs. It seemingly overlooked one very potentially powerful, high-profile measure, namely the designation of a United Nations International Day Against Terrorism, which is what we are currently promoting. The United Nations has a noble tradition of designating international days as a mechanism for highlighting and facilitating international mass mobilization around an issue. Such days include the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the International Women's Day, International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the International Day for the Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and the list, of course, goes on. And why is it that we're saying October the 6th? Why the Cubana tragedy? Why is this particular day being promoted as a day to highlight terrorist atrocities globally? The historical record confirms that the 6th of October 1976, the Cubana attack, the terrorist tragedy, occupies a special precedent. In effect, it sets a precedent-setting place within the whole sweep of international terrorist atrocities. The reality is that a full quarter of a century before the perpetrators of the infamous September 11, 2001, 9/11, as it's been parochially described, terrorist attack conceived of the evil idea of using an in-flight civilian airline as an instrument of terror. A cabal of anti-Cuba terrorists demonstrated the devilish horror of such a concept in the skies over the Caribbean island of Barbados. It was on the 6th day of October 1976 that within minutes of a Cuban civilian airliner taking off from the national airport in Barbados, a bomb that had been planted in the cabin of the aircraft by anti-Castro terrorists linked to and supported by the USA Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA as it's more widely known, it exploded. As had been planned, the violent explosion caused the Cubana airplane to plunge into the waters of the Caribbean Sea in close proximity to the west coast of Barbados, and every single one of the 73 Cubans, Guyanese, and North Koreans on board the said aircraft perished in this precedent-setting act of terrorism. In the aftermath of the downing of the Cubana airline, the people of Barbados were faced with the horrendous task of retrieving the mangled, dismembered bodies of the victims, mostly young Cuban athletes and Guyanese medical students from the Caribbean Sea, and of course coming to terms with the shock and trauma that this unprecedented act of butchery generated in this small 166 square mile island nation. The two masterminds of the terrorist bombing of the Cubana Flight 455 were Orlando Bosch and Luis Posada Carriles. They were arrested in Venezuela, but were never really held accountable and punished for their role in the Cubana tragedy. Indeed, Carriles escaped justice altogether when he escaped from his Venezuelan prison, while Bosch benefited from a protracted 11-year trial marred by a contamination of the evidence against him and was ultimately acquitted. Furthermore, in the years after 1976, both of these arch-terrorists were permitted to reside in the USA and were given protection and support by the several Cuban-American counter-revolutionary terrorist organizations stationed in the city of Miami. Indeed, Carriles and Bosch became so emboldened by their US-based support that in the mid-1990s, Bosch embarked upon a new conspiracy to assassinate Fidel Castro, while Carriles masterminded and carried out a terrorist campaign to blow up hotels in Cuba. The Cubana terrorist atrocity is therefore particularly significant in that it constitutes a convergence of state-sponsored terrorism and the use of a civilian airline full of civilian passengers as an instrument of terror directed at a national state. It is also an example of the dire consequences of permitting terrorists to benefit from any form of impunity. The selection of the 6th of October as the UN International Day Against Terrorism has the benefit of sending a very powerful message that there are to be no double standards where this issue of denouncing and eradicating terrorism is concerned. In the words of General Assembly Resolution number 70 of 291, the international community must reaffirm that all acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable, regardless of their motivation and wherever, whenever, and by whomsoever committed. We make the appeal for October the 6th to be designated as the International Day Against Terrorism in order that public consciousness against terrorism is not confined to the geopolitical interests of great powers and to guard against the error of globally condemning acts of terrorism only when they're perpetrated against great powers. We propose December the 6th not only because of the Cubana Airways tragedy that has served as an original template for many of the future tragedies which have followed, most notably 9/11, but also because of the global and cosmopolitan nature of the tragedy perpetrated in the airspace of a peaceful, neutral, non-aligned developing Caribbean state, namely Barbados. Already several of the governments of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, have signaled their willingness and intention to support this proposal and to undertake responsibility for placing the appropriate resolution before the General Assembly of the United Nations. Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, for example, of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has been very proactive and has already taken steps to bring the proposal to the attention of all of his fellow CARICOM heads of state. And as far as the way forward is concerned, following this week of commemorative activities to mark the tragedy of the 6th of October blowing up of the Cubana airline, the coalition of organizations will write to the Caribbean community, the Association of Caribbean States, the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, and the Bolivarian Association of Latin America and the Caribbean, and will formally request that these multilateral organizations place this matter before the United Nations General Assembly through the modality of an appropriate resolution. Further, we will engage with the Cuban chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity and Cuba's Institute for Friendship with the People to formally request the government of Cuba to support such an effort to introduce an appropriate resolution before the General Assembly of the United Nations, and further to which we will launch and maintain a comprehensive international civil society education campaign in support of the entire effort, with critical support from the Cuban chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity and the Institute for Friendship with the Peoples, known as ICAP. We invite the Barbadian Caribbean with us as we undertake this important initiative on behalf of humanity. Our collective civilization will be the richer for it. And as I mentioned at the outset, there are a number of organizations that have supported it. I will read their names again just for the benefit of totality. The Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, the Clement Payne Movement, the Caribbean Pan-African Network, the Global African Congress, the Organization for the Victory of the People, the Pan-African Coalition of Organizations, the Israel Lovell Foundation, the Barbadian Cuban Friendship Association, and the 13th of June 1980 movement. So that is the summation of what we are trying to achieve today. And at this point, I'll hand the mic back over to my brother, Mr. David Denny. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Lalu, for your very important presentation. I would like to welcome our brothers who are online. But at this point, I would like to...
community that has the consciousness that is required for this present international moral order. Because as civilized human beings, there must be responsibilities for our action, and as a collective consciousness, we must forge in a very deliberate and systematic way what are the landmarks towards that civilization that we hope to achieve. Here within the Caribbean, we are saying in as clear as possible, we want and demand that this space be recognized as a zone of peace, zone of justice. I am representing the Pan-African Coalition of Organizations here in Barbados, and I would like to add to the call for the recognition of the 6th of October as the International Day Against Terrorism. And I would like to add the decade for people of African descent. It has been given to us from 2014 to 2024. We as African people globally, it is our historical responsibility, knowing very well of our journey, we here within the diaspora especially, knowing of that journey of terror. We would like to add to the decade for people of African descent, collectively and globally, that we call upon the United Nations and that there be a resolution within that decade before it finishes within the year 2024, that this day, the 6th of October, be designated the International Day Against Terrorism. My brothers and sisters, this is our contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Unfarvels, for your presentation. At this point, I would like to invite one of our Pan-African elders from Trinidad and Tobago, Brother Kafra Cambon, to address you.
And we still see it because I don't know that actions of that kind that took place in Barbados are statute barred. And I feel that what we are doing now should be part of a renewed momentum to ensure that the state that was responsible for what took place, not just the individual, but the state that is responsible, the United States, has to be brought into some kind of justice. I don't know what form of justice you could take against the most powerful state militarily in the world and its tremendous influence, but there must be some form of sanction, even through global sanction in some, even if it is just verbal, even if it is, just refreshing this in people's minds and reminding people of what we are dealing with a state that has so much power, not just in terms of its military and all of that, but even more deadly in the fact that it is so able to spread its views around the world. And even if what we can achieve is to get people to look more strategically, to look with more, in a more insightful way at the role that the United States has played and continues to play in the manipulation of the globe. And this act must not be forgotten. And Tobago, from that flight, those who were part of the terrorist group organizing it, but that must not take away from the fact, and let me be clear, they were not Trinidadians by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't want to put us into the blame. In fact, I think that Trinidad fortunately played an important role in identifying those people who had the new level that portended 40 to 41 years ago is something that we need to bear in mind. It's something that we need to continue to bring into the minds of people so that we don't see terrorism only in terms of the individuals who are equally condemned, but whose dangers are far superseded when a state decides to take such a bold action on its own. So I would like to, on behalf of the Emancipation Supportive Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, on behalf of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, again extend condolences to those who lost their loved ones, their family members, and everything else in that tragedy. But more than that, I have to say that I'm happy that there's an occasion like this that brings it once more to mind and even finds a way now from this platform something to project to other generations who were not around at the time, who may never have heard about it, and who don't have proper perceptions of the structure of power in the world and the evil that lies at the center of that power. Because too many of our young people are still growing up with illusions. So when you talk about terrorism, nobody identifies it with some of the states that have performed the worst terrorist actions globally on a global scale. And as horrific as the individual acts are, it is far more frightening when it comes from a state. And sessions of this kind, where we remind ourselves about that tragedy that took place 40, 41 years ago, are important if only for reaching the young. And what comes out of this, we have to find a way to reach our young people so that they could understand the nature of the world in which they live. Because sometimes you can't just tell them and they understand. They have to be confronted with actions of this kind. So I thank those who have organized this meeting. And I must say that on behalf of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the Caribbean Pan-African Network, that we think it is important that we were a part of it, and we look forward to whatever follow-up actions we may decide on today, whether it's symbolic, whether in whatever form of action we can take. We look forward to playing our part in those actions, because we are not just talking about the past, because we're talking about the mentality that created that is still there, and we are looking at how we can best protect the future.
Okay, thank you, my brother, for your presentation. At this point, I would like to invite our brother from the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Brother Gerald Pereira.
Good evening and greetings to everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate the brother Lalu Hanuman for that outline, which I think can go along with our demands. It's a very beautiful presentation, and we can use it as a part of as a standard document or so. On behalf of the National Directorate of the Organization for the Victory of the People, I would like to congratulate the revolutionary and progressive forces in Barbados, especially our fellow Pan-Africanists, for organizing this international press conference to commemorate the 46th year of the bombing of Cubana flight CU-455 that took the lives of 73 innocent and peace-loving persons off the coast of Barbados. Now, I am not going to get into much of the details about Bosch and Carillas. We know a lot, we come year after year, we mention these names and so. But Barbados, I want to congratulate again our brothers and sisters in Barbados. Because although Barbados did not, no Barbadians lost their lives on that flight, but it took place off the coast of Barbados. I am happy, I'm so proud to see the role that activists in Barbados are playing to commemorate the anniversary of this dastardly act of state-sponsored terrorism. It was sponsored by Rogue State USA, an intelligence service of Rogue State USA. And since I'm on that, in passing, I think I should mention that my brothers and sisters should check out the book, Rogue State, A Guide to the World's Only Superpower by William Blount. It's excellent reading. But what I would like to say is this: given what is happening globally, and to look at the Air Cubana bombing that happened so many years ago, which was an act of state-sponsored terrorism, and look at it in the global context. Now, the United States has a list of countries over the years that it identified as sponsors of terrorism. They have destroyed some of those countries. Iraq was accused of sponsoring terrorism, of supporting bin Laden, which was highly impossible because we know bin Laden's fundamentalism could never converge with the secular ideology of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party. Only a fool will buy into that. Libya, a victim of terrorism, of acts of terrorism, was destroyed. And the idea is to destroy every progressive and revolutionary regime by supporting groups that are known terrorist outfits. And we know that the United States has made use of the mafia. They've made use of neo-Nazi organizations in the Americas, both Central and South America, to not only destroy progressive and revolutionary organizations, but to destroy the Cuban Revolution. From its inception in '59, the Cuban Revolution was never given a breathing space. Not because the Cuban Revolution is Marxist-Leninist in orientation or communist. It is precisely because Cuba dared to assert its sovereignty. Anyone that does not bow to the United States in this so-called backyard will be reined in. It has nothing to do with communist ideology. Any progressive nationalist regime, we only have to look at what happened in Honduras when they removed the progressive regime a few years ago. But getting back to the issue, because we're talking here about terrorism, and this is very important, that the United States is a sponsor of terrorism. I want to draw this carefully to my brothers in the region. It's very interesting that a number of Trinidadians who went to prison and have criminal records were allowed to purchase airline tickets and travel to the United Kingdom. Never traveled before. They never traveled before. Traveled to the United Kingdom, then on to Turkey. And when they arrived in Turkey, or Turkey as the Turks demanded it should be called, they were transported. They took buses and crossed the Syrian border into areas occupied by not only Turkey, but where American troops were present and troops from NATO, to enter into Syria to join the so-called Islamic State to wage war against the Syrian government. I can tell you this, brothers. I have spoken to people from Turkey who consider themselves very apolitical. They're not activists. But they were shocked to see not only these Trinidadians, but others who were traveling from Britain, Germany, as far as Australia, with huge sums of US currency and being facilitated at the border to go into Syria. Why I'm telling you this is that what happened when they bombed what happened in 46 years ago when the Cubana flight was bombed, you can see this continuity that America supports. America is a sponsor of terrorism. And the United States, Britain, and a number of other countries have sponsored and facilitated the movement, in some cases not directly, but through other parties, to facilitate the movement of these terrorist outfits in different parts of the world. We've seen where the revolutionaries in Mali and in Burkina Faso, the military, they are saying that they have evidence to show that France is colluding with the so-called jihadists and these bogus Islamic militants to destabilize the Sahel. They're seeing it, and we have touched on this many years ago, ever since the overthrow of the Libyan revolution. So, This commemoration to commemorate the bombing of the air Cubana that we hold year after year. The time has come for us to make some concrete demands, including that the sanction, the illegal, immoral, and unjust sanctions against Cuba and the people of Cuba be lifted. That Cuba be removed from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. Cuba, never in the history of the Cuban Revolution has Cuba ever sponsored one act of terrorism. Cuba give legitimate support to liberation movements fighting it. Cuba is a victim of state-sponsored terrorism. So to put Cuba on a list of countries that sponsor terrorism is ridiculous, it's absurd, and it's cruel. And we have to reject it. We in the OVP, the Organization for the Victory of the People in Guyana, we endorse the call for October the 6th to be declared International Day Against Terrorism. Tomorrow, there will be a commemoration at the Cuban Embassy in Georgetown. But I can tell you this, brothers and sisters, in Guyana, this commemoration is very low key. It's very low key because the main political parties and all the political parties on the landscape are afraid to say anything about this tragedy. It's going to be very low key. We are the only ones who will participate in the commemoration activity tomorrow because both the major parties in this country are captured and they're quite happy to take directives from the US State Department that is transmitted through the United States Embassy in Georgetown. They will say that it was an act of terrorism, but they never identify the terrorists. They don't go further than that. And again, this is where I'm saying that Barbados is leading the charge, and Barbados must be congratulated. The various organizations in Barbados must be congratulated, as well as the Global African Congress and the Emancipation Support Committee in Trinidad and the Caribbean Pan-African Network for standing up for justice and for keeping this alive so that this generation and those to come will know what happened and who are the real terrorists. And it is time that we demand that the real terrorists stand up. Thank you,
my brother. Thank you. Thank you, my brother, for your presentation. At this point, I will now like to turn to Brother Sakaya Thomas, who is the chairman for the Global African Congress. Brother Sakaya Thomas.
Thank you, Denny. Hello, brothers and comrades. Good afternoon. Global African Congress, representing African and African descendant people across the globe, is pleased to be part of this initiative of civil society organization in the Caribbean and the wider Caribbean diaspora, coming together to launch this campaign to have the United Nations designate October 6th as the UN International Day Against Terrorism. The backdrop to this campaign, the significant amount of terrorism that the Cuban government and people have been subjected to since the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. By October the 6th, 1976, the bombing of the Cubana civilian aircraft in the territorial space of Barbados is not a footnote in the history of international terrorism, but one is among the worst and most barbaric acts of terrorism, if only because of the organized is nature of such an act on October the 6th, 1976. We know that these actions of terrorism against Cuba are designed to create the most severe consequences, and therefore the killing of all 73 civilians was of no concern to the bombers and the plotters alike. Furthermore, we know that the CIA sponsored this bombing and provides sanctuary to the terrorists from their accountability. Over 60 years, the act of terrorism against Cuba has killed 3,478 persons and caused many injuries with long-lasting damage to over 2,900 persons. These actions of terrorism also include the damage to property, estimated to be a total of $181 million. Donald Trump is known for his inability to speak the truth. Consequently, days before he finished his mandate as President of the United States, he decided that his pathological line must include punitive action against Cuba, certainly additional punitive action. President Trump, in addition to his act of cruelty against Cuba, was also reversing the policy decision made by President Barack Obama as part of Trump's lifelong anti-Black racism policy and practice. Among other things, he decided that Barack Obama must be erased from history. President Trump fraudulently placed Cuba and the state of sponsoring terrorism, link reinforcing the United States government criminal embargo against Cuba. Donald Trump knows the consequence of other states' unwillingness to trade and engage in other economic activity with Cuba, because the U.S. gave itself the power to penalize any country once a country is placed on the list of countries supporting terrorism. The question, therefore, is to President Joe Vice President Joe Biden. Is well known of the factors and policy consideration that went into President Barack Obama's decision making to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba and remove some of the sanction and economic embargo against Cuba. After all, in President Joe Biden or Vice President Joe Biden's words, he and Barack Obama was the last person out of the room. During the Democratic Party primary election, Joe Biden told us that he came out of retirement because he wanted to stop Donald Trump's vicious and racist policy decision, both domestic and foreign. Likewise, he needs to stop Donald Trump's craziness and erratic behavior. Those were the words of Joe Biden. Why has President Joe Biden not reversed the pathological lies and the fraudulent claim against Cuba? Mr. President, are you of the same accord as the lying Donald Trump? President Biden, we, the democratic people of the world, call upon you to go into the White House tomorrow morning, using your privileged position as executive order to reinstate the agreement President Barack Obama, your friend and brother, according to your words, had with Cuba. Finally, we want to congratulate civil society in the Caribbean, as well as we want to congratulate CARICOM government for its solidarity and support with Cuba over many years. I ask CARICOM to intensify its support for Cuba in this moment of great difficulties resulting from the cruelty of the United States government. To my Cuban brothers and sisters, we want to thank you again for your internationalism, especially your medical brigade and your outstanding support for ending apartheid in South Africa. Cuba will never be alone. This outstanding initiative of October the 6th against terrorism must be intensified and globalized. We as civil society must hold our government accountable and do whatever it takes to raise the consciousness in the Caribbean, because we in the Caribbean, with our genesis that begins with the enslavement of our people, have every right in the world to show the world. Yes. Countries like the United States and Britain has no moral authority to tell us anything about justice. To place Cuba on the list of terrorist countries indicate your injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother, for your presentation. At this point, I would like to recognize the daughter of Bobby Clark, who is with us here this afternoon. So would you please applaud her for for joining us? Our brother from the Republic of Azlan, Southwest U.S., occupied in 1848. I would now like to recognize him and invite him to address us. Enrique Barman, I would now like to give you the opportunity.
Thank you all. Thank you all for having me here, comrades. It's interesting to before I get into the actual presentation or talk about the documentary, it's interesting to note that there's a lot more similarities than differences. Our land was stolen. That's the way we were enslaved. You were enslaved in a different way, but in the end, it's the same enemy. It's colonialism, it's imperialism. So sometimes when people ask me, well, why did you do this documentary if you're not Cuban? Well, we are Chicanos, we are oppressed minority, and we are U.S. taxpayers, and some of us don't like the fact that our government agencies do these type of things, right? So there are many links, more links and differences. I'm here to present to you a documentary that we finished this year called Cubana 455, Chronicle of October 6th. And it deals with a new approach to the story of Cubana 455 and the tragedy that happened 46 years ago, tomorrow. It does deal with more declassified information that was not published before. There are interviews with Posada Carriles when he was in jail in Panama. There is a clip of an interview with Orlando Bosch where he basically doesn't deny that he did it. And there's also the only interview that I am aware of that exists with one of the actual bombers. And we were able to interview him in Caracas. So the idea of linking the documentary to the October 6th campaign came about on a trip that I did to Barbados and one of the interviews I did with Ambassador Kamisong. And that was the opportunity to have the synergy and say, hey, here we have a documentary that talks about the tragedy, the victims of terrorism. You're doing a campaign. We live in the US. We have the responsibility and the obligation to create consciousness amongst the American people for them to understand that this act of terrorism cannot go without any justice. At this point, the only justice we can do is the fact of making October 6th, International Day Against Terrorism. So we think that it's very important that we're here present at the launch of this campaign, that we're here present at the condemnation of having Cuba on the terrorist list, because our obligation is going to be to have U.S. screenings of the documentary throughout the country. Well, except in the South, of course, in Florida. But anywhere else, West Coast, East Coast, we're there. We don't want to put our lives in danger, obviously. And we're going to launch the screenings as of spring 2023. And as, you know, Chicanos and Chicanas, as an oppressed minority that we are, you know, we do support Cuba's right to a free, sovereign, independent, and socialist nation. And we definitely are committed to having October 6th as a day of remembrance, that terrorism must be condemned in all its forms, no matter where it comes from. Because terrorism is the murder of civilians. And period, that's what it is, and it's not to be tolerated. And we all know the history. Obviously, it's been mentioned, the history of the U.S. empire and its involvement in different sorts of terrorism against Cuba and other nations as well. And obviously, the economic blockade against Cuba, the reinforcement of the blockade, especially now with the hurricane that just passed and the energy crisis that exists in Cuba, the blockade just makes it much more difficult. And that is a form of terrorism too. Obviously, economic sanctions against a nation that has never attacked the United States, that is a form of terrorism. So I want to end it with this. I want to invite everybody that is here and online to come to the screening that we're going to have of the documentary. It's the first time that we're going to be showing it here in Barbados. We just had a screening in Cuba, in Havana, on September 24th. That was very well received there, of course, by all the Cubans. So this will be the second public screening that we do, and it's going to be on Friday, October 7th, 8 p.m. at the Barbados Museum, correct? So thank you so much, and I am really happy that I'm here, that our film is here, that you're here, and this is just the beginning of a very, very long journey. It's taken us many years to complete the doc, so I think that definitely it's been worth it to get here, and now there's another journey that we have to fulfill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my brother, for your presentation, and all of us will be there to give you our support. On behalf of the Cuban Barbadian Friendship Association, I would like to say that we fully endorse this call, and we are very supportive of this call, and we support the idea of demanding that October 6th be designated as United Nations International Day Against Terrorism. So we fully support this position from the Cuban Barbadian Friendship Association. So at this point, I would like to say thanks to all of you, and I do recognize the representative from the Embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and our brother David Comensong. Yeah. And our brother David Comensong, who is the ambassador for CARICOM. We're very happy that you're here to witness civil society's position in terms of our recommendation. At this point, the floor is open to any questions from our friends on Zoom or our friends that are here with us. The floor is open for questions. And we have a panel here who will be willing to answer any of your questions. Feel free, any of our persons from Zoom, if there's any questions that you want to ask, you can now ask us. Oh, yeah, this is it.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for their presentation. Brother Enrique, just wanted to know that whether or not there are any plans to screen that film in Canada. There is a very strong Canada-Cuba Friendship Association, and I'm sure that they would support.
Yes, definitely. The way we want to get to Canada is through the film festivals. There's the Hot Docs Film Festival in Toronto, which we will be submitting We just missed the International Toronto Festival, but we want to go for smaller, non-commercial, documentary, political, if possible, festivals, because obviously mainstream is not going to be interested in this at all. I mean, and it's not worth the $200 to submit an application. But yes, and if you have any contacts, please share them with us, because we also, besides the festivals, we want to go with community-based groups. That's what we're going to be in the United States. We're not going to do commercial venues. We're going with unions, with community organizations of different sorts. That's how we're going to do the screenings in the United States at the community level. So,
Thank you. I'll exchange Frank Saptel's information for the Canadian Labor International Film Festival.
yes, thank you. Much appreciated. I just want to put the word out that obviously this doc is there for anybody that wants it. I mean, at this point, at one point we thought we'd recover the money we would put in, but it's not. Over the years, it became, you know what? It's not about the money. It's about the cause. The money's gone. Money will come later to buy your tortillas and beans, at least. But it's available. Anybody has any connections? We want the documentary out, period. Eventually, the only thing we're asking of people is that not to broadcast it on television yet, because that would disqualify us from certain film festivals, but we could do private screenings with different organizations, because eventually in Cuba, it will be broadcasted on Cuban TV on October 6, 2023. And after that, it'll be available for any television station anywhere in the world to use. So, because the important thing is to raise consciousness, rescue the memory of this tragedy, or this murder, correct? So, that's it.
Any other questions? Yeah. We are going to send the official statement that was read by our brother Lalu to all of the media houses in Barbados, and internationally we will be sending out the statement. Also, we would upload an edited version of the video, Facebook and YouTube, so that the world can see it. We will also make contact with our brothers and sisters in Telesur, so that Telesur can do some full coverage in terms of giving us some coverage in terms of putting out our statements here today. So this was a very important session for us to push this cause and for us to be able to create the conditions for media houses to assist us with this cause. At this point, I will like to invite Brother David Comelsong to address you on the program for Bobby, our planned program for Bobby, and to help us to mobilize so that the Barbadian people can participate and will know about this activity. Over to you, David, about the program for Bobby Clark.
Thank you, brother Denny. As brothers and sisters across Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean, and even further may be aware, we lost a great son of the Caribbean, a great son of humanity. Very recently, I speak of none other than the late, great Robert Bobby Clark. Bobby gave this world more than 60 years of selfless service, selfless activism, in the multiple capacities of political activists, trade unionists, Pan-Africanists, humanitarian, human rights lawyer, revolutionary. And we are determined that we must properly give honor and respect and pay tribute to this giant of our Caribbean civilization. And so our major event, an evening of tributes to Bobby Clark, will take place on Sunday the 9th of October, right here in Barbados. The venue will be the Golden Square Freedom Park, the home of the heroes in Barbados. And many outstanding Caribbean personalities will be coming to Barbados specifically to pay tribute to Bobby. I speak of personalities like Prime Minister of the Kafra Cambon, Trinidad and Tobago. I speak of Brother David Abdullah, Trinidad and Tobago, Sister Peggy Nesfield of Grenada, and several others. In addition, some of the most outstanding progressive artists of Barbados will be there to pay tribute with their art. Most Honorable Anthony Gabby Carter, for example, Senator John King. And of course, the entire event will be capped off by our inspirational Barbadian Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley. So that is the major event. We invite everyone to come to Golden Square Freedom Park on Sunday, 5:30. We will start. But to let you know that as we commemorate this 46th anniversary of the Cubana tragedy, every event that we hold this week will, in a very real way, be an event in tribute to Bobby Clark. So tomorrow, when we go tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. when we make our pilgrimage to the Cubana Monument at Paynes Bay in Barbados, where not only will we commemorate the tragedy of 46 years ago, but we will also be rededicating that Cubana monument. Bishop Derek Richards of the Methodist Church and our own Baba Tifashe will preside over that ceremony of rededication. We will have our Cuban ambassador, our Venezuelan ambassador, our Guyanese Consul General. We will also have Minister Chantal Monroe Knight, Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office. We will rededicate that monument, but we will also pay respect to Bobby Clark. On Friday, when we make our way to the Barbados Museum to see this wonderful, powerful, highly educational documentary film on the Cubana terroristic incident of 6th October 1976, there too we will pay tribute to our brother, our mentor, our comrade, our elder, the great Bobby Clark. So, brothers and sisters, you are invited to attend all of these events. We look forward to seeing you there as we do justice to this great cause and to this great son of the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother David Comsong, for your information so that we would be able to attend the activity. But just to let you know that the Assembly of Caribbean People. They are watching us, and they have also endorsed the statement, the Assembly of Caribbean People. At this point, I would like to invite Brother Umfar.
Thanks, David. We will also like to make a call. And I'm saying we in a most definite form of language, because we are moving from the intellect to the emotion of the heart, and yet a recognition, even though it has not been discussed, nevertheless a recognition that abides with us all. And that recognition is to honor our brother Bobby Clark, not just with tributes, but to give him a tangible accolade. We all recognize the sacrifice to be a revolutionary of the likes of Bobby Clark. And I think as a sovereign people, it is our duty to confer upon our brother Bobby Clark an accolade that is representative of the Caribbean people. So I would like my brothers and sisters within the Caribbean region to come up with such that we can present to our brother Bobby Clark the highest honor of civil society. If the government wishes to get on board, we have no problem with that. But as civil society within the Caribbean, we'll be recognizing the greatness of our revolutionary elder, Bobby Clark. And I am asking one and all to begin the process of arriving at the necessaries that we may conclude the honoring of Bobby Clark with an accolade fitting of the Caribbean region highest award for revolutionary work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Umfar. We have come to the end of our program. I want to say thanks to all of our brothers from Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and in Canada who would have participated in this activity. Thanks to all of us that are here. And we look forward to many more international campaigns like this so that we can push our cause and so that we can achieve our objectives and goals. Thank you. May God bless you. Bye.